The news cycle moves so fast that it's hard to keep up with everything that's going on. One of the things I have to go back to is last week's podcast with Nick Cannon and Professor Griff. The outcome of this podcast was Nick Cannon being fired by Viacom and being accused of being an anti-Semite. Besides the controversy, the topics that Nick Cannon got into were very important topics for the African American community. I'd like to separate out the bullshit from the facts.
But even I want to go back to our community because forget they for a second.
Okay.
Why can't
we
accept that we are
Because
God?
we've been brought down to the point where we look at one another as just mere niggers,
right?
Plain and serious. But Wesley Muhammad said it best: the nigger got to die. I'm just gonna say it straight: the nigger got to die. Wesley Muhammad put it out because if the nigger died, and then now we can have this rebirth of the God.
Now let me play devil's advocate for a second.
And please do. But we have to define what devil is. It's the adversary of God.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and there's attributes to the devil, but go ahead.
Yeah, so let me go to the opposing
with the little
side.
With the little D.
With the little D.
All right, go ahead.
So is that almost the same concept as eugenics, or even when we tap into W.E.B. Du Bois's aspect, because he was someone that was saying the black man has to rise above, or I don't know if it's the same term as like we got the nigga got to die, but is it that concept of saying, yo, I want a purer black man, or the black man has to understand that he is a god, and the nigga has to die.
Well,
isn't that same concept?
Kind of like the same thing, but let's clean it up just a little so the vast majority of our people can understand it. The Christians say what? You have to be born again.
Right.
So what happened the first time? Because God don't make mistakes.
What happened the first time? Because God don't make mistakes. Understand something, and what the difference is a spiritual conversation and a fundamentalist or a literal conversation. And so from a mystical or spiritual understanding, what Professor Griff had to say there was big, because it basically points out the fallacy of God as this outside entity that needs to intervene. Right? Now, if you understand God's intervention would be based on a God making mistakes, then what he had to say just exposes the fallacy of fundamentalism. And so if we get into the discussion of what they were talking about in the sense of African Americans who have an issue with calling themselves God. And so he was asking, why is that? And Professor Griff said something that was important as well. He said, it's because the nigga has to die, right? We've been brought down to this understanding, basically. And in that sense, we've been brought down to believing that we're this story, right? And see each other as these niggas. Now, let's get into what they mean when they say God, because I know people are thinking, oh my God, they're calling themselves God, and so now they think they're the creation of everything. Like, no. They got into a discussion of the little g and the little d, not the fundamentalist understanding of the big G and the big D, this devil and this God that lives outside of you. God as the spirit, the energy of the soul that pilots the body, is something that's inside of us. When we say our peace is inside of us, you go inside to be able to listen or hear God. This is what we mean in the spiritual sense of that. And the same thing from the devil aspect of it, right? When you talk about the devil, again, as what Professor Griff points out, he says that the devil from the lower D, the devil is the adversary to God. And so the adversary to my spirit would be my body, would be my flesh, would be my ego, right? Me in the sense of thinking that I'm this individual and not understanding that I am this infinite being connected to all other infinite beings, right? Every being on this planet is piloted by this same energy, this same spirit, simply because they're born in different time, space, different bodies, different whatever. Now there's this sense of separation because we fall asleep to who we really are and now believe that we're this ego. And so, as he poignantly says, the rebirth of God basically is the death of our ego, the death of the nigga, the belief in the story that this is who we are, the belief in the story of limitation. And so, as Nick does something else, is where he plays devil's advocate and he talks about eugenics. And he talks about eugenics because some people have this confusion in thinking that when you're saying that, you know, you need to be the pure black man or you need to get rid of the niggas, that there are some people, right, that there's some individuals who are actually niggas and that we need to destroy them or remove them. And so he talks about eugenics, which is this white supremacist understanding developed in the late 1800s by a British individual, something Dalton. His name to me is inconsequential because he's just another contributor to white supremacy. But he is the founder of this eugenics understanding, which basically was just something that goes all the way back to Plato, of where there's this notion that if you got rid of the impurities within the population, the handicapped, the mentally ill, people who had darker skin or weren't, in a sense, these perfect creatures, that if we simply got rid of them, then you'll have this great population or this great society. This is what most of European society or Western civilization believed. And it culminates in the Nazi Germany we find in World War II. This was Hitler's motivation at killing 12 million individuals. 6 million of these people were Jews, and the other 6 million were people they considered not worthy of living. They weren't pure Aryans, right? And so Hitler's mission would have been to destroy anyone on the planet who was not Aryan, who was not European. And not just European, you had to be this certain European, right? He took his white supremacy to the hilt. Now, it wasn't until it really went too far for most of civilization before they went and began to start doing something about Hitler. But all that time, while he was killing people and doing whatever, they didn't have an issue with it. They didn't have an issue with it until after World War II, when they found out the extent of what Hitler had done, and now people knew that he was under this influence of this white supremacist understanding called eugenics. And so now people did away with it. They also did something I think is interesting. They painted the Holocaust as this religious thing. Now, I want to make sure that I am not belittling what happened to the Jews. It's a horrible thing as they are caught up in this racism. And if Jews weren't considered as white people, they were just as persecuted as we are. But still, they weren't persecuted from a religious standpoint. They were persecuted from a white supremacist standpoint. Now, this seems a little confusing for people because today of what's happened within white culture is that Jews who have these more European features have been included in white culture, white society. And so some Jews can simply just take off their symbolism and now blend in to the population. That's something we can't do.